Couple things. I loaded, as of last week I had this, I loaded all of the course content onto UB Learns for the rest of the course. I am going to add one more feature. I think I mentioned this too on using Collector, where we'll show you how you could set up a map that you could use to collect data with your Android or iPhone or iPad. If you're interested in installing that software from the SRI on your personal device, there's only two ways we can do this. The university doesn't have tablets for us to use. You could install it on your personal device. It's free. Or I can bring an iPad or iPhone, come to that, and you can practice online. The software is ArcGIS Collector. It works with ArcGIS Online, which we will be talking about. And you can use an MXD from here, and you can publish a map service from a map document in the lab here to the university's ArcGIS Online instance, and then use that to set up a collector app. That's the type of thing you would send someone in the field and collect data. At least in my company, and I don't think our company's unique, the use of that has just exploded. We're doing it like on 50 projects now, where even just a year ago when I was standing here last summer, we were just getting into it. So I think that would be a good benefit for you to learn and say that you have experience with. So I'm going to add that in. So that's not reflected here yet. I need to make the material for that and maybe even a 6th lab. But other than that, most everything's here. I have also the 5 labs. I had to update this one. ArcGIS Online has changed a little bit, mostly cosmetic changes since last summer. And a quiz, which would be due at the end of the semester. If anyone wants to submit it beforehand, that's certainly encouraged. I won't say no. It will make my end of semester life a little easier. If you took the 555 class, the quiz is similar format where it's just generic, basic, high-level questions about programming and about the content. Obviously, it's open book. You can download and start it tonight if you want. A lot of the stuff will be stuff we haven't talked about yet, but just finish it sometime. So I like to be flexible, sometime between now and the end of the semester, which sounds so far away, but it's not. Yeah, I don't know about that. This accelerated format's kind of tricky. I kind of wish this could be done in a semester-wide. Someday we'll do this as a semester-long course. So just about everything is on the UB Learn site except this new material that I've decided that I'm going to give you on ArcGIS Collector. You would need at least an Apple device, I think at least iOS 7, to work on iPad or iPhone, or an Android tablet. And if you don't want to do that or don't have access to such a device, I'll bring a tablet and my iPhone, and we could try it out then if you want. The software is called ArcGIS Collector, and it's downloadable from an app store. Esri provides it for free. We'll talk later when we talk about ArcGIS Online how they make money. Obviously it's not free, they're making money somehow. We'll talk about that. But for you to download it, it's free. So that out of the way, we'll talk about more about JavaScript. And if my memory serves, some of the beginning of this is a review, partially of not only because we went ahead, but some of the slides I had copied and pasted twice and are duplicate from last Wednesday. I had also suggested the possibility of a working session, but not this week. Maybe not even next week or the end of next week. I want to get through more material before we have a working session. But it's possible the week after that we'll have a session where we'll meet, and obviously I'll let you know beforehand. We'll meet instead of a lecture. You can spend the time working on the labs, and then I'm here to help you if you have questions as you're doing them. With such a tight time frame and with us here 2 days every week, that will minimize the amount of time you have to do homework outside of the class. The weather's so nice this time of year, it's a shame. So we already talked about this. Just to review very quick, JavaScript is dynamically typed or weakly typed. Unlike a strongly typed language like C# where you have to define everything in advance. I think there's another. Variables can be declared on the fly. Variable types can be changed on the fly. Things that you can't do in a strongly typed language like C#. You can even very simply assign properties to a class in JavaScript. We looked at that just at the end of the lecture last Wednesday. Things you can do. So in general, JavaScript is a more flexible language than C# because of that. Because it's dynamically typed. We talked about Booleans being true-false variables. And again, this is review. We talked about arrays being a list of items. Talked about a lot of different things you can do with an array. The date class we spent some time on. To review, I have to upload. I have YouTube. I have videos to upload to YouTube, and I haven't done that. If I don't get to that tonight, I'll do that tomorrow. If you're interested. And just at the end of last class, I think we were talking about JavaScript objects, where JavaScript does support many objects, and like I just said, unlike a static language like C#, with C# objects and interfaces are all predetermined, whether either by the developer like ESRI or you building your own class in the project. You can create objects on the fly. Like here I've defined a county object just with that notation with the brackets, and I'm on the fly assigning properties. So in other words, there's nowhere before this in the code have I said, oh, the county class has a name property and a seat property. That's the first time that comes up, and because JavaScript is dynamically typed, you can do things like this. And here it shows also how the autocomplete in Visual Studio will recognize the properties that you set up. So those are properties in two syntaxes, either just by object.property is a way to get at an object's value, or object with the property in square brackets and single quotes is another way. So this .name and largest city in quotes essentially does the same thing. Just two different syntaxes. There may be a difference behind the scenes. I'm not aware of one off the top of my head. They essentially, for our purposes, do the same thing. This might have been the last slide we talked about, where you can also build your own method on an object by assigning the method a function. So I'm adding a method. Remember, a method is an action. I'm adding the action add license by assigning it to an anonymous function. You don't have to, by anonymous means you don't have to give the function a name. So then that, whatever happens in your function is the method. ArcGIS Server JavaScript API makes good use of anonymous functions, that we'll see later in the semester course. Any questions? Now we're going to talk about JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. And what I've written here is a bit of an understatement. When you're writing a web application, you definitely have to often pass data back and forth. We looked at XML. Well, this is XML here, Extensible Markup Language. We talked about XML a little bit at the beginning of the course. We also used an XML file in GEO 555. The config file that a desktop added creates as an XML file. And here's a generic example of an XML file. And so you'll notice now it looks a lot like HTML. But instead of tags to render a run page in an XML file, you define attributes with a start tag and a stop tag, just like you're doing in HTML. So in JavaScript itself, remember we defined an object with properties. Here's how you would define an object using XML for county. So we're defining the object as a county, and then there's sub-attributes. So here's how we would define Lockport, Niagara, Niagara Falls, and number of licenses. XML is widely used. It's a very common way of transferring data across the internet. You'll come across it all the time. A problem is there's a lot of white space. XML files become huge. Note here how much space is taken up, by this white space and by the attribute names. So that's XML. Another way to define an object is with JavaScript object notation. Developers will often shortcut that name to JSON. The JSON notation is very simple. sorry, the case with the brackets is getting a little bit tricky. So what you see here is JSON notation for defining our object. It's a list of string pair of attribute names and their values, and the object is defined within curly brackets. So in a nutshell, that's what JSON is. And we will also make heavy use of JSON in the ArcGIS server app. JSON, like XML, goes well beyond GIS development and is widely used in conjunction with JavaScript. It's a good thing for you to know. So here we just have name attribute pairs within the curly brackets. So in double quotes, the name of the attribute, which happens to be name, colon, what the value is for this object. So we're starting an object. Its attribute name is Niagara. Its county seat, its attribute seat is Lockport, and so on. So these are called name attribute pairs. We have 4 of them here. When we're done with the object, we close the bracket and then the semicolon. If you want to, any questions? If you want to get at this object in code like this, you can do something called deserializing the JSON. What that means, it takes the JSON string and parses it out into an object that you could get the properties in code like we did about 5 minutes ago. And that is used with the JavaScript method stringify. So if we set this to my county, it's off the screen here, but imagine a my county equals and then that string. I can have another variable, I call it my JSON county. JSON in all capitals. I just told Daniel these things are always lowercase, and there's an exception 5 minutes later. But in this case, JSON is it's a class that's in all capitals. .stringify, that sounds weird, doesn't it? And then the string variable representing that has JSON in it, in parentheses, that will take that and make it into, actually this, I'm reversed. So what this actually is, I'm talking about the next slide already. 5 minutes ago we set up an object this way. Stringify takes that object and makes it JSON. So this is what we did at the start. We take that variable, JSON.stringify with that variable, and it converts that variable into its JSON notation. So now that variable we talked about at the end of class Wednesday and this evening, the beginning, with stringify has been converted into a JSON representation of that object. Again, with the method stringify, that one is all lowercase, but the JSON is all capitals. The opposite is the parse method, also on the JSON class. The parse method takes something that is JSON and makes it into an object, like we saw earlier. So here we have variable myJSON, which is a string. We parse the JSON, and it ends up as an object in JavaScript where you can access the properties like we saw at the beginning. So the two keys here are stringify and parse. Stringify and parse help you go back and forth between JSON text and a JavaScript object. Any questions? JSON can also be used to store arrays. And this is where I said JSON is simple, and I stand by that, but it can get tricky. It's easy to get confused. So remember, JSON always on the outside is enclosed in curly brackets, like here. So this is a confusing. I'm using JSON to store multiple counties. Yes?
Sorry.
That's okay.
You said it's not always in the curly brackets?
Oh, it is always in the curly
It's always
brackets.
in.
Yes. And if we were defining it to a variable, the curly brackets would actually have quotes around it, like we saw here. So yeah, JSON is always within the curly bracket. What makes this a little more complicated is this JSON text is defining multiple objects of the type counties. So I starting with curly brackets, with counties in a string, colon, comma. So the first item is the name of the layer. Or the name of the array. So the name of the array is counties. And now in square brackets, I'm looking at this because I think I told you, I think I missed a square bracket. At the end here, there should be an end square bracket. The square bracket defines an array of JSON objects. So this counties array that we're creating has 4 count items in it. One representing Niagara County, Erie, Genesee, and Orleans. And then there should be a square bracket here to close the array. It's missing that. So if we just look at this, because everyone's seen what I'm doing, if you look at this piece, it's like the first slide. So the first piece is, so it's JSON within JSON. The first piece is a set of JSON text defining Niagara, then comma, a set of JSON text defining Erie, comma, JSON text defining Genesee, and then JSON text defining Orleans. A squared bracket to end the list that's missing, but should be there, and then a curly bracket to end the outer JSON thing. So this is, maybe you see my point, that while the notation's simple, it gets complicated, it gets tricky easily when it's very easy, as I've unwittingly proven, to mess up your end and start and end brackets.
You said it's not shown off on the side over here. But
Yeah, it should be here, or I mean, you could put it there.
I'm talking about the actual tag.
Yeah.
Part is not showing where
It should be.
coming before county.
Yeah. Let me see if I can even. Yeah. Oops. It should be like this, because the first item in the outer JSON is the name of the array, counties. The second item is the list. So those 4 sub-JSON objects should be within the square brackets. And I guess this text is just review that you can still use stringify and parse. Well, I'm not gonna type out because we'll be doing this in the lab. I'll go through some of the key points that you'll do in lab 1. I'm not sure we need to sit here and go through them, because you either already have started or will be starting on that on your own. In the first lab, you will create an HTML page that uses JavaScript that allows the user to convert between units on a website. So some of these screens just highlight for us how to create a new HTML page. And we did this last week too. File, new file. There's a variety of different things you can create a page for. HTML, at least here is the second one from the top. And for those that were in the desktop class in the spring, we're recreating what we did on the desktop level in that class. But now we're using a web page instead. So then I think you're familiar with this by now. We save our new file to an HTML extension or HTML. I don't think there's any advantage anymore to HTML. Believe it or not, is anyone aware that we used to be restricted to 8 characters .3 after an extension? I think that's long gone. But when the web was coming out in Windows 3.1, or even Windows 95 or 98, around there is when they finally did away with that. A file name had to only be 8 characters, and after the dot in the file name, you could only have 3 characters. That's why sometimes, and I still get in the habit of .htm, even though it's probably not necessary anymore. Most programs will recognize still both HTML and HTML as a HTML file, though. I'm showing my age with that. Windows 98 may have been the first operating system where you didn't have to do that anymore. So in the header, you will, again, this is very similar to the layout, but just to go over what you'll be doing, you add the title, and we add inline style sheets. So review, if you have more questions about this, review what we talked about style sheets. I think that was last Wednesday. And again, so these are specific, just a review here, style classes. So we created a class called myHeader. It has the font Calibri 18-point bold. We created a class called myRadioText that's 12-point normal Calibri. And again, it's a custom class that has the dot in front of it. So you define a tag using this class with class equals in the attribute tag. If we had said TD or table without a dot, then it would automatically apply that to everything. This may be
You say class equal.
Yes.
Okay. So I didn't put in the class equals for that. So it needs to.
It needs to be. That makes sense because I think it was just showing time zero. That's not a critical.
The dot my radio text. Okay.
Yeah, and that's why it just shows Times New Roman on your page. It's not a critical problem because it will still work. This would just define the text a little bit and use the different fonts. And that's actually a good point. It's not always critical. Sometimes it could be. In this case, if you didn't do that, the only problem that'll happen is you won't see these fonts. It'll just draw, like in your case, with the default font on the computer. It's not a terribly critical thing, but worth noting. But if you had just put TD or A or body without a dot, by default, any tagged item of that type on the page would inherit that. By doing dot and then naming your own class, then you use class equals, and you can define the format for just one of them.
Do you still need the quotes?
Yes. Class equals in quotes my header. In the start of the body tag, then remember everything that's going to be rendered on the page is in the tag body. We begin a table object. I think we talked about table objects last Monday, not last Wednesday. That stores the web controls, and I think, as I mentioned, then tables originally were used for kind of in a substitute for Excel. You want to display data in a table format, but now we often use tables to force locations of things on a page to be in a certain location. So we define a table. We set this style, which basically indicates the table should take up the entire width of the web page. You can feel free, once you're done with the lab, a good way to learn some of these things, play with some, set it to 50% and see what happens, and play around with it. Remember, a table has rows, vertical rows that are defined by TR, and then TD are columns within the rows, just to review that. I think this is worth reviewing. So here, I've started the first row of the table. I've started the first column in the first row. So we have our table. We have a row, TR. And the first column in the first row, it's TD, the column. So within that column, we'll select what conversion to run, that text. And it will use the style myHeader, because the class equals myHeader that you see here. So actually, in this case, there's only one column. And then we start a second row. So we end TD, and this can get tricky. It's very easy to forget to end tags. Another thing that happens a lot, I do this all the time, when you first type the table tag, it'll automatically put an end table tag up here for you. Sometimes like, gee, thanks, that's nice of you, but then I forget and put another table tag down here, and now there's two, and that can cause problems. Sometimes I wish it didn't do that. Something tells me there's a way to change that setting that I'm not aware of. So then we create a second row. We end the TD tag, then end the TR tag. We create a new table row and a new table column. And notice I've got nothing. This is something a programmer uses a lot too. I set the style equals height 20 pixels. So I'm forcing that second row to be 20 pixels high. This is just a placeholder. So there's nothing there. I immediately then end the column and row. I'm just using that to give some white space of 20 pixels. Whatever 20 pixels comes out to be. So developers using this or other style sheets, other methods often will employ methods like that just to give some space in between elements. You don't want everything crowded.
So the your TD is the column within that row.
Exactly.
And that's why you have it in between them.
Yes, that's exactly the case. And you always need a TD.
I got it.
There's a temptation sometimes if you just have one row, you might think, oh, I'll just put it in the row. But with content, there always needs to be a TD. Even if it's just one column in the row. Then I start a third TD, or third TR. I put it all in one. That's interesting. I could have. I also don't want the first lab to take forever. So within that one TD, class my radio text, I have the three radio buttons. I could have made that three TDs, but I think this works. And then I close the TD and TR. There's another placeholder. Another table. Web development can take a while. And then in that second table, I also have one TD, and it's got the input. Where the button run. So this kind of goes through, and then finally when I finish that TD and TR, I am done with my table, and I close it with /table.
When you
Yes.
transition from that first table, the first half of the table to the second half of the table, what
Yeah.
was-
I just split them up to two slides.
Okay, so that they.
So here I ended a TR, and I'm just starting a new TR.
You're starting a new tier.
Yeah, see, so I ended this row. You see it starts with a new row here. I could have tried to fit that all in one slide. I just broke it up onto two different slides.
Gotcha.
But yeah, there's no other transition other than that. So that defines the GUI, the graphical user interface for this web page. We know what the web page will look like. And now we need to add the content, which often with HTML you have the HTML to define how the page looks, and then something like JavaScript that actually builds the functionality. That's exactly what we're doing here. So we'll write a function calculate, which was called from the button. I think I'll go over that in a little more detail. So on the input button here, I actually didn't use a button, I used an input. And we talked about those being similar last week. But the key is there's an on-click event, and I have calculate. At this point, I'm not passing any arguments. So I have calculate all in lowercase, that's important, with parentheses. And value equals run just means the button will say run on it, on its face. So now that we have set up the GUI for the web page, we use JavaScript to write the functionality.
You closed out the other half with the table, correct?
Yes. Yep, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. So if we go back.
All right. So then you're starting this, the next one.
Yes. So now, after the table, I'm starting the next section with the script tag. I think I did mention, by the way, I can't bring this up. I mentioned that there's now space on the M drive now in case you want to save project files. And on these machines, it's the M drive, the geography folder, GEO 503. There's a folder called student folder. Let me actually see if someone hooked this up. I doubt it. But under student folder, there's a folder with each one of your names. It's not hooked up, I don't think. And then that's just a personal location where you can store files and so on. Oops. Let me get it back. There we go. That GEO 503 folder also has, so I got started on it last week, a map document and some shapes, a GEO database under data that you could begin using for that Lab 6 collector assignment when I developed that. So I've been starting to put that together. So now back to the JavaScript. Oh, they upgraded Office on this. So here's the start of the script tag, and there's two important items on the script tag. Type equals text / JavaScript, and language equals JavaScript. So that basically tells your web browser that the language that's coming here is JavaScript. And then when we talk about JavaScript, you can just start typing JavaScript text that will run automatically, or you can put everything within a function. For this particular lab, we're going to put everything within a function. And I've named the function, like I said here, calculate, all lowercase. It does not accept any arguments, so even though it doesn't accept any arguments, you still need to put the blank parentheses. And everything in the function is included within the curly brackets. So the first thing, we're setting a variable called input text, and that variable will be equal to text value.value. In other words, whatever the person put in text value. If you go back to text value, you'll see this is the text box where you're going to type in the number to convert. So we'll take whatever number the user converted and assign that to the variable input text. Well, we're going to do some testing on what the person entered first. We talked about this JavaScript function Wednesday, is and an, with the two n's capital, everything else lowercase. And if you remember, is not a number, that stands for is not a number. So this will return true if input text is not a number. So in other words, if someone types in something that can't be treated as a number, this will return true, the if statement. If is also lowercase. And then we can issue an alert box warning the user that's not a number, and then the keyword return, which will exit the program. Return exits the program. If we want to convert between units and the person doesn't type a number, we cannot go any further. the rest of the code's not going to work. So return bails out. Okay, further down, label result, we have, I think I didn't talk about that. Put label result. Oh, here it is. I kind of skimmed that. I do want to cover that. Going back to the HTML, when we went over HTML tags, we talked about an attribute called div, but we didn't really touch on div until now. Div is basically just a placeholder in your code that you can access and write HTML to. So here I see div, I give it an ID. So I have a div called label result. It has a class, and then it just ends. So to start, it's like an address on your page with nothing there. You can, at runtime, while the code's running, this would make divs so powerful, and you will use divs a lot with ArcGIS Server JavaScript. You can insert content into your page dynamically. So everything else that we talked about, let me go back again. We're setting up stuff from the beginning. We're setting up miles to kilometer. All that stuff's already there. But a div tag lets you write stuff on the fly. So in this, I'm not sure why I put that like that. I think just to demonstrate what it can do. The div has a method called inner HTML, lowercase inner HTML in caps. And that you can give inner HTML a string, and that puts that string into the div tag. So now, at that location in the code, which was blank, it'll put the word Greg in there. What I don't show here, and often, is what you can actually put HTML in there. It doesn't have to be just a text. You could have tags in here, /A and an image. You could put an image in on the fly with an img tag. This takes HTML content and inserts it. I haven't gone to that level of complexity yet, but we could. Like I could have Greg in B/B, so that the word Greg would appear in bold. Questions? We will use divs a lot. This is the first time we've seen them, but certainly not the last. So I'm setting some variables. I've set new number equal to 0.0. And similar to C#, sometime when you're defining, although in C# the number type is defined, this will force this to be treated as a float number. I've also defined conversion factor as a new number classed object in JavaScript. And I have defined 3 string variables, we'll see why in a minute, as blank strings. My conversion, my units 1, and my units 2. In the next phase, we will figure out what radio button is checked. If we go all the way back, sorry for jumping back and forth, I think it's worth it. Going back to the first page, we had 3 radio buttons. So if the user wants to convert miles to kilometers, they click that radio button. If they want to convert inches to centimeters, that one, and so on. So each radio button has a property called checked, which returns a Boolean. Because it returns a Boolean, I don't need an equals something. Just radio.checked will return true, and that's what I need for the if statement. So here, if radio miles is checked, and remember, all of these are within one panel, so only one will be checked at a time. If the person checked radio miles, this one will be true, and we set my variable my conversion equal to the word miles. And on the next page, we'll see why we're doing the method for doing this. If the inches radio button's checked, the string my conversion would end up being inches. And if the final radio button's checked, the string my conversion would be set to the word temperature. Any questions there? Yeah.
It didn't appear actually on our website, right?
So this way or another? I'm sorry.
The graph, the string didn't show up on the results on the website. It just should it show?
I don't think so because. Are you getting the right answer?
Yes, but I didn't see any string like grad or other business. So the meaning assigning a string to.
I'm wondering because this is all in the button. I wonder if it was there so fast. I mean that it was there for a split second and then was replaced by this. Would that be?
So maybe I can.
Yeah, try that. That's my. If not, we'll have to look at it. That's my guess initially, is that it was there like for a very brief moment, and then replaced by your answer. Because this is all within the function, so it'll change it to Greg and then run through this very fast and then change it to this. But that's an interesting question. I'll check that. Any other questions? So now we have the my conversion string, which tells us which of the 3 conversions the user asked for. So now, and we talked about this Monday, I think we'll use a switch statement to define the conversion. Each one of these conversions has a separate, different math equation. So we use a switch statement using the variable my conversion. Case miles. If the case is miles, the new number is going to be the old number times, I don't know what happened there. Times 1.609. That's the conversion from miles to kilometers. So now we have a new number. We'll use that obviously in the result. That's 1.609 times as large as the original miles that were entered. And then we define my units 1 and my units 2, miles, kilometers, because we're going to use those 2 units for the text that will appear at the end. The second case, obviously very similar. If the user chose inches, to convert to centimeters, we take the number of inches and multiply by 2.54. If we want to convert from Fahrenheit to Celsius, it's a little trickier because they don't have the same 0 base. But this is a formula obviously for converting Fahrenheit temperature to Celsius. And now using those 3 strings, I'm building inner HTML to be a little more complicated. So it's the input text, the original number, space, the original units, space, and then is between spaces, and then the new number, space, the new units. So if this were 62 miles, that's going to come out to about 100 kilometers. This would read 62 miles is 100 kilometers. And then now, and I'm suspecting that's what happened, the inner HTML of div was blank, then it was Greg for a split second, and then it replaces it with this, I think. And so when you get to that point, you're done, assuming there's no bugs to work out. You're done, you can right-click, view in browser to see the result. Do I have, oh, it's right here. So here's roughly what it will look like. So this person put 65, this person's me, clicked run, and then the inner HTML for div, the div label result will show up here. And 65 Fahrenheit's roughly 18 on the Celsius scale. And you see the different fonts and bold and font sizes because of using those classes. Are there any questions? It shouldn't. I think they come up in Internet Explorer on these machines. It shouldn't matter. I mean, I think most of what we do is basic enough that it'll work in any browser. I mentioned that is a good point. You know, if you're designing a web page to use by the general public, you would need to test it in every browser to make sure it's cross-browser compatible. And we won't get into this, but there are browser objects in HTML where you can actually return and find out what browser the user is using. And that's important because sometimes the code is a little different. So you might have to code, especially in HTML, you might have a little bit different tag if it's Chrome versus Mozilla versus IE. So sometimes on a more robust site, you have to test and see which browser is being used and then redirect that. Have a little bit different code based on that. That has become less and less of an issue, thankfully, as time progresses. 10 years ago, that was more of a problem. The browsers are becoming a little bit more alike in what they'll allow. But that certainly is, if you're developing a website to be used by the public, you need to keep that in mind. Now, sometimes we're lucky. We do a lot of sites for government agencies where they insist that users use Internet Explorer. And that makes our life easier because then we just have to test it in Internet Explorer. Or Edge or whatever they call it now. So any others? Let's get some good questions. Any others? I wanted to expose people. I mean, you can use this with our JS Server API or not. We want to talk a little bit about jQuery. On jQuery.com, I have this definition. It's a fast, small, feature-rich JavaScript library. It actually, what it basically does is makes your JavaScript code easier to use. It has some additional functions with it. So you know how you wrote the function calculate. Whoever invented jQuery wrote a lot of functions in the background that makes doing some things in JavaScript easier. And that can be used with this jQuery. There's also a nice thing, and this actually works right into your question, is that the jQuery functions are designed already to work in every browser. So something that you do in jQuery should work in every browser. jQuery works with the HTML document object model. Everything that can be done with jQuery, and this is a good point, there's nothing that you could do in jQuery, there's nothing in jQuery that you can't do in JavaScript on your own. It just is easier. So if we talk about HTML, when I talk about HTML DOM, document object model, we did a little bit of this already when we were doing the lab, but I didn't talk about it. The document object model is created every time a browser loads a page, and it means elements of the page can be referenced in code. So JavaScript and jQuery using JavaScript can get at any object on your page with a top level called the document, and then HTML, then everything beneath it. We used the HTML DOM a moment ago, even if I didn't call it that. When we took the text box and got its value, I could do that because of the HTML document object model. So with the document object model, JavaScript can read the attributes, any attributes on the page, and change it. Just like we changed the label to read Greg and then to read the result. You can change CSS styles. So in other words, anything that you defined on the page through the DOM could be accessed in JavaScript. You could on the fly write a button that changes the font Calibri to Times New Roman. You can remove elements and attributes. So you could remove the run button if you didn't want to. So in other words, the document object, to sum this up, the DOM lets you access any object on the HTML page. So jQuery is an easier way to access all of these things. So to utilize jQuery, there are two ways to do this. And the way you choose this depends on the environment that you'll be in. We'll talk about that. The first way to do this would be to navigate to that website, jQuery.com/download. So there's different versions of jQuery. I think this is the same as, oh, it has changed slightly since last year. The most common, or the most recent version is 2.1.4. So you can download these files and notice they are JavaScript files. jQuery-2.1.4 min and .js. So I'm going to, if I were to open them, you see a difference. Here's a difference between the min version and the full version.
Is it jQuery 2.1?
Yeah, 2.1.4, I forgot to update that slide, is the most recent version of jQuery. Last summer was 2.1.1. The changes are minor. So the jQuery 2.1.4.js file has these functions in it. And you never really, if you explore what you have, you never really need to go in here. I'm just showing you what it does. These are JavaScript functions that they wrote to do a lot of different things. So the difference between that and min, this is the same functions. In the min file, notice they've removed the comments. There's comments in this explaining what's going on. They also removed the white space. White space actually in JavaScript is actually just for humans' consumption to read. As long as you have all your semicolons and parentheses and brackets, it can be written like this. Why did they do? So this is the same thing as this. Obviously, this one's easier to read. This one's smaller. So 83 kilobytes versus 242 kilobytes. So remember, we're always aiming to minimize the amount of file transfer on the internet. So what you might do is download this for your own reference if you wanted to see what was going on. But when you put your website into production, use this one. Because it's only 80K, it's going to be more efficient. The browser's going to load it quicker. So what else I wanted to do before we get to that point. I'm going to copy these. I'm going to go to, as long as I remember where I was. I think it's here. And here's where my HTML pages are that I've been storing for the class. And this is kind of a best practice. I've created a folder called scripts at the same location as these HTML flags and HTML files, and I'm going to paste them into that folder. So save to a known location. If you want to reference the files, they need to be in a location the HTML page can get to, which is why I put them in a scripts folder. And in the screenshot, I did the same thing as I just showed you. The screenshot is 2.1.1. But remember how we use the link tag to reference an external style sheet? I need to add a tag to my HTML page that tells the HTML page to reference that external JavaScript file. So we saw how we could use an external style sheet file earlier in the class, the .css file. I can now use an external JavaScript file, JS extension, in my HTML page too. But notice the main difference, we already used a script tag earlier, but I just ended script and I started typing text. The other option here is to have the source attribute and point it to another location. In other words, the script folder and then jQuery. So if I go into my HTML, I'll say script, but instead of just typing a script, I'll say source equals, pick URL, scripts. I'll pick this one. Oops. So I'm going to see what I'm doing here within my page. Now that I've added this, all of those functions in that jQuery file are now accessible on this page. So any function, just like I can call function click me right on the page, I can now call any function that is in that jQuery JavaScript file. This is nice because now we have access to all the powerful things jQuery can do. You can do that for your own scripts, just like for those in 555. Remember we wrote that function helper near the end of the class? You can do the same thing with a JavaScript file. You can have your own external JavaScript file that you reference that has common helper functions in the same manner. Where I work, we have a couple. There's a JavaScript file called global.js with common functions. One developer might write a JavaScript function and then share it with others, and they say, oh, I could use that. So we put the function in the global.javascript file and reference it here. So now anything in jQuery is available on my page. Any questions so far? And we won't use jQuery much at all with ArcGIS JavaScript. They use another shortcut language called Dojo that we'll start talking about. But I wanted to make sure, I wanted this course to at least cover jQuery to some extent because it's very useful. You'll see if you're going for a programming position, it certainly helps to show jQuery experience if there's JavaScript where you're applying. This script kind of just shows what I showed you in Visual Studio. The difference between the uncompressed and the compressed version, or it's the exact same thing, it's just remove comments and white space to make a smaller file. I mean, this is easier for you to read, but the computer doesn't care. I mean, to the computer, this one's easier because it's shorter. Where that makes my eyes spin, my head spin. So to review this, to utilize jQuery, it must be referenced in your HTML page. We did that right here. We already did that. The other way to do this, which is often preferred, is that there are online sources hosted by Google where they have the JavaScript function online. So instead of having to download it and put it in your directory, you can just call this version of jQuery online at this address. And we'll look up and see where that address is, whether that's still the same. And this introduces a concept called a CDN, or Content Delivery Network. ArcGIS Server is a content delivery network. And more, I mean, everything's going this way. It's a JavaScript library in the cloud. And the cloud has the content delivery network. One of the preferred sources, of course, is Google to get JavaScript jQuery libraries. And believe it or not, I've seen a lot of systems where, I mean, Google has a whole army of servers that serve up content to millions, billions of people. They know what they're doing. So sometimes you get faster results pulling the script from Google than you get from your own machine. I don't know how that happens, but it does. So, I mean, whenever we, in almost every case we do this, use the online version. Obviously, you can't do that if your user won't have an internet connection. We have a JavaScript APA site for New York City. It's an emergency management site. And they usually are online, but for disasters, this is a problem at Hurricane Sandy. They lost access to the internet. They have a laptop with the site on it. So we had to go through and find every case where we were linking to a online CDN and change it to a local version. Because that laptop is designed to be run, when all else fails and the internet's gone, they want to open up the laptop and still use the site. So everything has to be local. So consider that if you think you may not have an internet connection, do the first method we looked at. Okay, so they actually have a different one here that so instead of my local copy, I can point to that location on the internet at code.jquery.com. And all of the different versions are available. You don't have to use the latest one. Well, not all, there's a couple versions available. Though I said they don't change much. If a new version comes out, it's always good to test it out before just assuming everything will work, even though probably in many cases everything will work. So notice they have other content delivery networks here. And one, for example, is Google. It looks like the path is still similar to what I had in the slide. So all of that JavaScript file is located online at this address, ajax.googleapis.com. Ajax libs jQuery 2.1.4. So again, you can either way reference it online using a content delivery network or download your file. jQuery also has a version called jQuery Mobile, which is optimized even further. It provides support for touch screens, for so it has, we won't get into that here, it has objects and events for hardware where users can actually touch the screen to have something happen, like a tablet. It's also even shorter, or it's even smaller. It's more compact. We've used the mobile version even for desktop systems just because it's faster. You can reference it from the same location, but the jQuery mobile is not tagged. So an even smaller file means it's even more lightweight. And like I said, it contains additional functionality for developing JavaScript pages on touch screens, like an iPad or a Surface or a phone. The most frequent use of jQuery is to make a selection on an object or a set of HTML objects on your page and make an action. So you'll often always And this threw me when I first learned jQuery because I've never seen anything quite like that, quite different. Most jQuery statements will start with a $sign. The $sign references the jQuery library. So basic syntax, you have $, and then parentheses, and inside the parentheses is the item or items, dot, and then an action. So $sign tells us, okay, a jQuery statement's coming. This tells us what object on the DOM we want to work with, dot, and then what do we want to do with it. So there's a basic general introduction to jQuery syntax. So here's some examples of jQuery statements. Notice that, like I said, they all start with a $sign. There's a keyword. This is JavaScript, not just jQuery. We haven't talked about this yet. We will occasionally. There's a keyword this, which refers to whatever the current object is, whatever is selected on the page or highlighted on the page at the moment. We can often get at with the keyword this. So this dot action will cause this action to occur on whatever the current object is. We can put, kind of like those general tags in CSS, we can enclose in quotes here the name of a type of tag. So the second line here performs an action on all of the table rows on the page. jQuery is closely tied to CSS. The third example here performs an action on every element on the page that uses the class GEO. Remember we had my header when we did lab 1. So you can issue a statement to do something on every class that has the class GEO. The fourth one maybe is the most relevant. You can issue an action on a specific item based on its ID. Remember I said how important that ID was, and now we can see that even further. So if there's an element on the HTML document object model with the ID button saved, we get out by putting in quotes a $sign. It's a little different. $sign, the ID of the button, dot action. There shouldn't be a space there, it's a typo. That will perform an action on the element with the ID button saved. And don't forget here within the jQuery identifier there's a $sign. So another nice thing about, actually we do this a lot with our JS Server API, try to remember if it's in the content of the course. But whether it's GIS or not, this is a useful function of jQuery right off the bat. Sometimes your page, this is the internet things load, your page might not be ready yet. It's loading, especially on a busy page, like think of the CNN page, there's all sorts of videos and images on it. It might take a while to load everything. The page may not be ready until everything loads. So, especially with jQuery, we hit this. Do you remember? I think I still have it. When we talked about the HTML document object model, no, I don't. It's not the one. There's in the document object model. There's a very top level object called document that represents the entire page. You can get at the entire page through this document. So $sign with document in parentheses gives us in jQuery gives us access in jQuery to the entire document. And the document in jQuery, there's an action called ready. So what this means, and then you see function. It's an anonymous function. I said we'll be doing that more. So inside ready, and we're starting to get tricky again because there's a lot of brackets to open and close. So document ready lets us define what's going to happen when the document is ready. So this code won't run until the document's ready. In essence, it waits until everything's ready. It prevents stuff from trying to happen before it can. And within the document ready parentheses, we define an anonymous function. Anonymous, again, it doesn't have a name, but it has curly brackets. So I would write code in here. So that code in there would run when the page has been loaded and is ready to be worked with. So there's that advantage of right off the bat something with a jQuery. And as I wrote here, it's good practice. Any jQuery code on your page should go within a document ready statement. Otherwise, you run the risk of, like for example, think of how a web page loads. Trying to load fast. You can kind of see what I mean. See how this block loaded, and then the image loaded, and things loaded. That's what I mean. Let's say you wanted to run something on the image, and you put it in the body script. You could run into trouble if the script tries to run before the image is there. Because it's trying to run on something that's not there yet. So that won't happen if your item is within the document ready. Like the same thing. So I guess that's a very similar thing to the last slide. So I think that still introduces the next slide. So just to review, a common use of these actions, and I guess that's what we get to at the next slide, is to bind an event to a specific element of all elements matching criteria. For example, if we want something to happen every time someone clicks on a table row, we would call this binding an event to every table row. Or everything with a certain class, or just one specific item. That's maybe the most common use of jQuery. And here are some events that you can bind. So I'm going to show the next slide. I should come back to this. So here, instead of action, I've defined $button save with the £sign prefix. So I'm saying on the page button save dot click. So we're saying we're on the fly adding a click function. When we did lab 1, you programmed the click function from the beginning. jQuery lets you be more dynamic. So here I can, even after the program is run, I can change what click function is assigned to the button with this action and an anonymous function. And on the previous slide, I have for you some common examples of mouse events that you can use with jQuery. So I use click. Another common mouse event is the DBL click for double click. You can have mouse enter and mouse leave. So that jQuery will run when the cursor comes over an object. and then you can have a different one run when the cursor departs from an object. So if this is my object, this is my hand. If the cursor comes here, mouse enter would run, and then mouse leave would run as the mouse goes somewhere else. You can use jQuery to capture key events. When a key down, I'm trying to think offhand the difference. Key up is easy. When a person releases a key from the keyboard, key up runs. Key press and key down are pretty similar, because when someone presses a key. You can use jQuery to work with forms. We talked about forms Monday, or maybe even the first week of the course. And I do this quite a bit. You can have things happen when the page is loaded. For example, in ArcGIS Server, although we use Dojo for this too, you can have a bunch of things happen when the page is loaded, like the GIS type things, like to find which layers are visible, to find the map extent, and so on. So one thing we can do, I'll do this on my example. I'm going to remove some of this. I'm going to write an input button. Type equals button. The ID will be button click. So we have a button with the ID button click, and the value or the button text will be click me. I'm then right after the button going to create an A tag or a hyperlink tag. It says click me to change button text. Now notice I haven't done this before. I put the pound sign in. This link is, normally we would use an A tag to go to another page. I'm actually using this to run a jQuery that I'm going to run. So the page doesn't go, the link doesn't go to any other page, but it will change the text using jQuery. So I need to make sure this is added, which it is. See, I've got a script reference to the jQuery library that I downloaded. And now within, I'm going to delete all this stuff from last week. We don't need this anymore. Within my own JavaScript, and notice Visual Studio recognizes the jQuery. I've added a document ready loop. It's not really a loop, document ready block. It's not a loop, it doesn't run multiple times. And I had to stop and think, this gets tricky. So we have document in parentheses, ready is the action. So ready has its own parentheses, so it has to end with that. See what I've done there? And then within ready, I have function, anonymous function with curly brackets. So to review now, anything within this block will not run until the page is ready for it to run. jQuery will determine that the page is ready. It'll determine that all the objects referenced within there have been loaded and are ready to accept an action. So like the slides, so now I have another loop. I have a specific jQuery item that references the item myref. And if you recall, there's myref. So I'm referencing just the item with the ID myref, just the A tag. So what I'm doing is I'm defining a function using jQuery that will run when the user clicks the A tag. That's a jQuery way of writing that. And it's an anonymous function, so I would write that right within here. So within there, I am going to use another jQuery line on the item with ID button click, that input button. And I'm going to use an action val. That actually changes the value, so it'll change the text of the button. You notice clicking the link, let me do that again. Clicking the link, the click was assigned to jQuery, causes the button value to change. jQuery can also be used to provide visual effects. And we'll look at some of this. So you can use other actions on jQuery. It would be show, hide. You know, if instead of changing the button text, you can make the button invisible or visible. We can have it fade or slide to another location, animate it, or stop an animation. There's also an action, ATTR, short for attribute, that allows you to change any tag of an element using jQuery. So I'm going to add some more text to this before the break. Let me just button flag. The button will start out with that value. So I'll add an IMG tag, ID equals flag, source equals the original source will be that page. So as it stands now, we get a non-SVG version. Don't look right. It must be. So now the image is in line. JPEG version. So I've referenced the jQuery. In the same document ready function, I'm going to add another selector for button flag. Actually, no. Yeah, button flag. And within this, another selector for the ID flag. I'll use attribute. The attribute of an image is SRC. SRC is where we set the image source. So ATTBR lets us change SRC to the second image. So I click on the button, hopefully this works. It did. The flag changed. I don't have this, let me try this. Just to show the different things we could do, I can also have the same thing occur on flag mouse enter. So I'll show you how jQuery lets you make more dynamic pages. So on mouse enter of the flag tag, it's going to change to China. Additionally, on mouse leave, and I'm hoping this works, that's China. I'll have the flag attribute changed to the US flag on mouse leave. You're going to see what I'm doing with the jQuery here. Oh, and it actually worked. So now, this is a good illustration of mouse enter event. I'm moving the mouse. The mouse enter event occurred. It's a little weird because the dimensions are different, so I'm having problems here on the edge. But if I move the mouse into the interior of the flag, now it stays China. So the mouse enter event occurred, and now the mouse leave event is about to occur. The mouse leave event occurred, and now jQuery set the flag back to the original. So I've added a dynamic content to my web page using jQuery pretty simply and quickly with just a couple of lines. While that could be done with regular JavaScript, it's certainly been simplified through jQuery. And I did something similar in the slides, except I used Buffalo Bills and Buffalo Bisons. Same thing. Yeah, we're getting ahead of things a little bit. It's 8:10. We'll take a break, and I'm going to start. I will start tonight on the Wednesday lecture. We're starting to get a little bit ahead of schedule. You guys are pretty good.